fucking closure.
Last time.
Let me get you recording everywhere.
Thank you.
And then, yes, we do have minutes from January 26th to approve.
Move to approve.
Is there, do I have a second?
I'll second, David.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I feel we've been productive already then.
They were succinct.
Excellent. Before we begin, are there any members of the public who would like to make a general comment? I should tell you that our mission today as a charter review commission is to talk about the emergency orders. That's what we talk about mostly, but it's still an open meeting.
Mm-hmm. No one up. Yeah.
Chief Jack Drum has joined us. And not to mention first select woman Peggy Lyons.
Yeah. Oh, they're coming in. They're invited for the day.
Yeah.
And Joe, go ahead if you'd like to talk about it.
Mr. Chairman, yes, I'd like to see if you're going to discuss the possibility of electing our zoning board as opposed to nominating them.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And thank you for when you came and mentioned that to us at our prior meeting. We have sent a question out to the attorney on this point. As you may recall, we have removed several boards from the charter. Not to say that they don't exist; they're all very important, but we pulled them from the charter. And then the thing we don't know the answer to is if a board's not in the charter, then who determines if it's elected or appointed? And our suspicion is it may go back to the Board of Selectmen. So we thought we'd get that answer first, but we've not forgotten it. Lauren and I, as a matter of fact, we're talking about this issue because I wanted to make sure we discussed it. But we wanted to get that answer first to advise the board.
Thank you.
Sure, and thank you for bringing it up, Joe. And Jane, I see your comments in the group. I don't know if you mean ZBA or if you're actually thinking of PZC. Oh, go ahead, Jane. You're here now. You're muted, Jane.
I would like to agree with Joe
sorry.
Mako that this is really an important issue. And there's been several recent examples of new problems with zoning board. And I think that making an elected office is critical. I understand you need to run it by the attorneys, but I think it's something we need to really consider very seriously.
Sure. And just to be clear, the issue of that we're asking for the attorneys isn't really about elected or appointed. I remember this issue some years ago that it was about half and half in the state of Connecticut are elected or appointed. It's really a question as to whether or not we're the Charter Review Commission, whether or not it is any longer for an issue for the Charter Review, or if the charter is accepted, then is it a charter issue or does it move to a Board of Selectmen issue? It doesn't mean the Charter Review can't do something about it, but we'd like to make sure we understand since we talked about it and are making another change.
Right. So I think that if the charter can't do it, then we have to sort of define, is it something that would have to go to a referendum, or is it something that the Board of Selectmen would have to do? So
I hope we'll have a little clarity of that. We'll have it when the attorneys give it to us, but I hope we'll have that by our next meeting. So Joe had brought it, and I'm sorry, I did your name wrong, Jan. I apologize.
That's all right, no problem. My fault. I didn't type it right.
I was only going off the all lowercase thing. So my apologies.
My error. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you. Any other comments from the public, Lauren?
That was it.
Okay, then let's go to the issue at hand. We are blessed to have the A team of emergency management of the town of Madison. So for the three of you, just to recount where we are, we spent some time talking for Selectwoman about the issue that you had raised to us, the somewhat awkward predicament that the town was in when it came to declaring town-based states of emergencies. We put in some changes, and we'd welcome your feedback at that, maybe at another meeting, or if you're welcome to, you give it now. about the town automatically going into a state of emergency if the state declares one. But the first select person we're also really struggling with degenderizing that term. We're open to any suggestion. But the ability as you, the lead executive, to be able to declare a state of emergency, and how long it stays in place and what the role of the other selectmen are. So we gave that a role. But what we're talking about in this conversation is, should the charter have any role when it comes to the conduct of an emergency? And Sam, I think you're probably and welcome, Sam. Thanks for coming. Nice to see you. I think you're probably the lead voice for us to help us understand where in your experience over the last couple of years, if you thought the charter, or among the three of you, if you thought the charter needed a role in sort of the emergency operations center side of the world, or the town conducting business during the emergency itself, or is the charter better off staying out of it and letting state statute run, assume the week?
So I think one of the issues that we ran into, and of course, nobody ever thought we were going to have a pandemic, but our state of emergency currently only allows us to go 21 days. So they had to keep extending the state of emergency once it was done. So I think that was kind of a little bit cumbersome. Going up to the 30 days is fine. Hopefully we'll never have to do anything for 30 days, at least in the next 3 or 4 years. Hopefully I can get out of here by the time anything else drastic happens. But you do have, between the local emergency operations plan and state statutes, specifically 29-8A, it gives the municipal CEO, the authority to do what they have to do to take care of the incident. Probably having some stuff in there for the timeline for so we don't end up with a declaration of emergency that is in there for years. That's what they're fighting about in the legislature now, going to be coming up this next week, actually, fighting about extended powers for the governor. But so I think there should be a time limit on it. As a sounding board, it's probably good to have the whole board together, or at least, a quorum for the Board of Selectmen to, depending on who's has these roles going in the future, somebody could be a little overzealous or not, at least you'd be able to vet out these situations before declaring a state of emergency. The thing to keep in mind, though, is, for FEMA reimbursements, it is good to have declared a state of emergency during events. And I think we did one for Henri, right, Peggy? So that we could tell the people on the shoreline to evacuate.
And I hopefully the automatic conversion of the town going into a state of emergency as soon as the state goes into a state of emergency should help with some of that.
Yeah, that would streamline a lot of it.
Peggy?
I just don't know if,
Sorry.
so like in this case of the pandemic, do we want to stay in a state of emergency as long as the state has? I know he's reduced his executive orders as going through this, but
well, I think that just kind of similar to our discussion about this, I think several months ago, I think the having the automatic is important in terms of streamlining it, and then having a little bit more of a extension on the renewal, just because of meeting schedules and things like that, it makes it a little better. I think that where I think that, if we stay or we don't stay, some of it has to do with the emergency orders that were issued and whether or not they were appropriate to keep extending the emergency orders, or not emergency orders, I should call them executive orders. And so I think Liz and I had chatted about this about a week ago. So I'm forgetting what I talked to you guys all as a committee before about versus what I chatted with Liz when she'd reached out to me last week about this. So I think trying to have a better definition of what the executive orders are and the authority to issue executive orders, because it was kind of confusing in the charter about the board operating under the board itself issuing emergency directives, or is it the first selectman issuing executive orders? So trying to clarify that. And then I think it's really situational, because sometimes, like, for example, a hurricane, the rest of the state might not be impacted, but, shoreline towns would be. So we could be in a state of emergency for a lot longer. And that's happened, during Hurricane Sandy and Irene, or the tropical storm. So where the town was impacted more than like the rest of the state. So having an idea of like what, a point where we would differentiate ourselves. So I think the town could declare an emergency without the state declaring either. So just making sure that there's kind of those, gateways each way to go into emergency powers. And then I think this, there was a lot of this confusion of talking about how the board of selectmen could convene and make decisions versus the first selectman acting under executive orders. And so trying to make that clearer. Those were some of the things we talked about. I mean, what were the local, what were the local things that we did under emergency or under executive, I'm forgetting all my terms here. So we issued for the beaches, for example, like waiving certain things at the beaches and certain policies and directions. Those were very locally driven that were Madison specific. Now as a town, we have the ability as a town to issue a mask mandate, and we haven't done that. So the governor had done that under his executive powers initially for the entire state. And now that was given to the towns. So the question is, that was, that's a kind of an example. Is that something that the first select person, if we had chosen to do that, would issue as an executive order? Or would that have been something that the Board of Selectmen should have issued for the town? Because it was done under the auspices of an emergency situation that under the governor's power. But then it was turned over as a decision that the town could make. So that's an example where it's kind of gray. Is that a board thing or is that a first selectman thing? So, so I just think trying to understand and how you can make that clear here. Now, you can't predict what the emergency could be. The next one could be something totally unpredictable again. And so, you want to keep things a little bit not as, too restrictive, so that the charter is a living, breathing document, and the town can adapt to the situation at hand.
So if I could, so
Yep.
the first part about calling the state of emergency is up in the screen.
Mhm.
So because one of the types of things we talked about were both, what if it's dislocated in the state? We were actually using the other example of when Hartford had that ice storm, and there was when that part of the state went into emergency, but we didn't. So we recognize that it's different. Basically, we put in an idea that the Board of Selectmen, or in the absence of establishing a quorum of the board with 2 attempts to reach each board member via phone, and the request of the emergency and at the request of the emergency director, the first selectman shall declare. So in other words, the first selectman gives a shot to try and reaches everyone. If you can't, and the emergency management director saying you need to do this, then you just do it. So that's puts the power with a little bit of a guardrail before the first selectman. So I think that was a question. And Liz, you ran that part of the meeting. Feel free to pipe in if I'm missing part of the conversation.
I'll make one little comment. I wouldn't get as specific to technology because, for example, having was in New York City during 9/11, phones didn't work, right? But then for some reason, email did work, so things like that. So I don't know, just throwing that out there. I don't know how you would like, this attempt to reach each board member. I don't know if I don't know. This is a language thing. I don't know if I would say an attempt. It's more like are unreachable after many attempts or something. And then the town could just document how it tried to reach that person. That's all.
This could
So
be,
now, but people are allowed to call into a meeting now, right? So if you had a meeting and you needed a quorum, people are allowed to call into it, right?
it's always
So,
true.
Yeah,
What-
so
what
you send them
about-
by phone.
and then, so now is the virtual stuff, has that been adopted?
Not,
You know, they
not
took them-
permanently. That's the legislature's going to be taking up the
So
permanent.
they're gonna be taking that up this session.
Yeah. And it's only
So-
through April right now.
So this could be changed to something along the lines, or in the absence of establishing a quorum of the board with 2 good faith attempts. Period.
Right.
That type of thing. I'm sorry, Liz. I think I talked over you.
No. I was just, I think, as Peggy was saying, when we talked, I think the first thing that we started out with was just clarifying, when you call it. And so I think, you've captured what we talked about and then what we had last week in our conversation.
Right, and I'm not sure if we said emergency management director or the emergency management team, you know what I'm saying? So really you're being advised that, say there's a toxic spill, for instance, it happens in the middle of the night, that we've got to shut down a certain area, we've got to call an emergency for Madison or whatever, you can't get in touch with people and we need to call, you need to declare an emergency, period, end of sentence. I think that's what, we were trying to think of all the possible ramifications and then, but, you're not just willy-nilly, I think I want to do something, so I'm going to declare a state of emergency and so I can put that through. That's the guardrail we're trying to come up against.
But so in that instance, the fire chief has, or the senior fire officer on scene has the ability to do that, make an evacuation zone without even calling a state of emergency. So there's specific powers that they get by state statute.
Okay.
So there's a lot of overlapping stuff that, basically, when you're calling a state of emergency, stuff really bad is happening. So, you're almost in dire straits. Fortunately, that didn't happen with Henri, but it looked like it was going to happen. It looked like we were going to take a direct hit at that time.
Right.
Yeah, no, I know, we were very lucky. Same thing with Sandy. Sandy looked really awful and then kind of calmed down a little bit. It was still an impact.
Well, and I think that there's been no time where the first selectman declared ever. It was always a board action, right? But you're covering this in case, if this were a true catastrophe, I mean, if it was poison gas or whatever, and, 2 of the selectmen or, 3 of the selectmen somehow, got knocked out in the poison gas explosion or whatever. So now you would have to have the first selectman, I guess, be the one to declare it.
Mhm.
So this allows for that.
I like how this discussion turns into a Roland Emmerich movie. We were doing the same thing last time.
Well,
You know,
it's all because of your background, Joe.
Yeah. We'll do the day after tomorrow.
Oh,
So I
Yeah.
guess the idea was if the state declares, we declare. And if the state, if you need to declare, right now it requires the board. Instead, we wanted, give it a try. And if you can't muster, then the first select person could do it. The other part of that, and Lauren, I don't know, we had a discussion about it, was to also provide a safety valve the other way, that any 3 selectmen could trigger a meeting to undo the state of emergency. And that way it would require a quorum of the Board of Selectmen, because we were also concerned about, the organization that calls short-term states of emergency all the time, the thing that Sam was talking about, the kind of the boundary situation on the other place. That way, basically the non-first selectman majority of the board could undo the call. And if you sort of think about it that way, that would have to be pretty extraordinary, right? So that
Yeah, no, I
way-
think you have to have that though, because you don't know what, you can't dream up what that scenario would be right now, but it could be possible. So,
Yeah, and if you get 3 selectmen that want to undo a state of emergency, there's probably a really good reason for it.
And the other thing, that the situation you described with Hartford, where we weren't affected by the ice storm, but the rest of the state was. So if the state declares a state of emergency and it's really not affecting us, do we really have to go into a state of emergency?
Well,
So should there be caveat to that says, it has to be confirmed by the first select person, or, rather than just being automatic.
yeah,
Nothing going on. Why are we going to go into a state of emergency?
Yeah, though I would, in a situation where the governor has declared the state of Connecticut in a state of emergency, I don't know that it's the worst thing for then the Board of Selectmen to have to meet to undo it, because that might be something that would require a little bit of thought, on the balance of having to get it wrong, going into the state of emergency and coming out feels better than being too slow to go into it. So I don't know that the automatically following the state once the state declares is so bad. We can always undo it at your next meeting or immediately.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you can call, like you said, you can call a special or the next meeting if we add that, what was just typed by Lauren, a vote of at least 3 selectmen can rescind a state of emergency at an official meeting.
Sam,
I think we say declaration of emergency rather than state of emergency.
Sam, when the state activates the Emergency Operations Center, we're not required to activate ours, right? We had a choice, from what I recall, to do that, right?
Correct. And they don't, so they activate theirs a lot without calling a declaration of emergency too.
Right.
Just because you're opening up your operations center doesn't mean we're going to be declaring a state of emergency.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I was just trying, because we've had partial activations at times, right? And with storms where they weren't sure how bad they were going to be. Because I've seen that.
Can I ask, while I've got the 3 of you here, is there, going back to the sort of the sub Board of Selectmen operation of the state of emergency? So Peggy, you brought up the distinction between an emergency ordinance of the Board of Selectmen versus an executive order of the
Right.
first selectman, and I think that's a topic we should take on next. Is there anything else about the operation of the town during this last mess that where the charter needed to say something?
I don't think so. Because a lot of it's laid out in your operations plan, emergency operations plan.
Chief, I know you're here. I actually have very little insight into how, I assume the police department does what the police department does always. But I don't know what it's been like for you the last year and a half. If there was anything that had to do with town operation that was significant to your group.
I've tried my best to be quiet.
I don't think anyone actually believes that, Chief Drum.
Oh, gosh. Just a bunch of thoughts. Obviously, if the governor issues a declaration of some sort of emergency, that's going to trump any statute or anything we have within our own germane to the town of Madison, other cities and towns. They have to comply with it. They can't. It doesn't supersede state law. Secondly, in most emergencies, and you follow the NIMS National Incident Management template, we deal with the chief executive officer of each and every community. And the reason they open up ops centers, not necessarily to declare an emergency like a windstorm, is because that's the best way the state can talk to like Eversource and other utilities. That's their coordination point. Doesn't necessarily need that declaration. And of course, when there is an emergency, what works in Madison may not work in Clinton. So I think for me, in my world and my world of the state police, we always dealt with the chief executive officer of the town. If you look at the component, you look at the how the strategies are and how they operate with the different sections of a command structure for emergency. You can't have a panel. You have to have one person that you have to go to and deal with directly, particularly when this thing is it's fluid. And most of the time we have emergencies, it's like dancing on a moving rug. So to chase down people to weigh in with a vote, Sam?
No, that's correct. That, you know, it's one thing about getting them together to declare this, the emergency, but going forward operational wise, you know, that emergency operations center has to be sterile. We can't, you know, once you put 3 select people in there, then it has to be a public meeting. We can't have the public in there when we're making decisions on whether we're going to let somebody's house go in the water or what's going to happen. So we have to be able to operate in our own bubble. I know that it might not sound good to you guys, but there are decisions that are hard decisions that have to be made at times that don't need to be publicized right away. And so you really can't, you know, it's what, like the chief said, we once the emergency declaration is made, and if how you decide to do that, you know, we need to deal with the chief executive officer and then the representatives from all the other agencies.
When we meet with the chief executive officer, he or she, in the case of Peggy, she confides in us and asks what we believe would mitigate whatever it is that we're challenged with. So the fire department, OEMS, the ambulance, the police, we all weigh in and give her what we think will work here. And she makes her decision based on that. I'm not speaking for you, Peggy. I'm just saying how I've seen it in the past, the track. And she's basing that on the confidence of the people that you folks hired and put in those spots, do the right thing and mitigate us through whatever the challenge is. If it's something long-term, and let's face it, we never face COVID is, you know, and who knows how much longer it's going to be here. It may be the rest of our lives, but I could understand long-term solutions, how the discussion and how it works its way through government. But I think that when you're dealing with emergencies that come up, windstorm comes in, it gets worse. It was a nor'easter. We're flooding all down through the streets. We need executive decisions, particularly for resources to be made now. So that's why she's elected she's the executive officer of the town. With that is a whole bunch of authority and responsibility. So I just think that we shouldn't put ourselves in a position where it makes it difficult when we have to mitigate through some sort of emergency, particularly that involves resources. And we know, Sam and I most certainly, at last minute, sometimes we have to scrounge to get stuff together. We need permission to expend any funds.
So maybe then, if I could for a second, I just want to make sure there are no questions from the commission. Because otherwise, then I was going to turn to the question that Peggy brought up about authority within, you know, how to make it clear that you can do what you need to do. Okay, a rare silent commission. So if that's the case, Peggy, maybe we can turn to the issue, and I know you brought this up before. So, you know, as you guys were operating an extended emergency, or maybe it's even more clarifying to think of snowstorms. What's the categories? How can the charter authorize the first selectman to do what the first selectman needs to do and not get in the way, where right now it's silent? So right now your ability to be you're the executive officer of the town. What are the types of things you think were vague?
Can we look at what we added in purple, so that, because we just did do quite a few things.
Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
Shall be authorized to approve any other budget is right. Enact emergency orders, temporary orders, such orders not to exceed 30 days without approval of the Board of Selectmen. Okay. So yeah, because I think this gets into the some of the issues that we bumped up against during the pandemic, where we made things to address immediate issues, but there was no mechanism to have the entire board endorse those, right? So here it looks like you're adding the ability to do executive orders. So you define it, which was something that was lacking before, right? Which I think is great. and you put a time, amount of time on it, which I think is great too. And then if obviously the people think that the town is doing the right, it's an appropriate order and we need to continue it, then the board would, I guess, validate it by another vote to extend it, right? Is that what this is saying?
Yeah, basically,
So
we tried to come to the three broad issues, which were
Yeah.
spend money, do emergency orders, and go declare shelters.
Right.
Were the three that came to mind. And Liz, I invite you to jump in because I think the category of the third one was before I showed up. I was teaching last meeting, so I came part way.
I think a lot of it's laid out in the emergency operations plan, the LEOP.
Yeah.
So if the charter steers towards the LEOP, then
Right,
Well,
and
I wonder if you don't want to specify what type of things, but just saying that they can do temporary emergency ordinances, but they cannot be longer than 30 days. Because we just can't dream up what scenario, right, could come up that would be needed. And then that way, at least there's the check, is that it can't go longer than 30 days.
So if we could hear
'cause-
from, I'm sorry, if we hear from Liz, then Joan.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that I think that that was part of what we wanted to clarify tonight by inviting, the three that we have on tonight to clarify what needs to be in there specified versus either alludes to another document or has state statute and so on and so forth. So if I'm remembering correctly, that was part of what we were wanting to accomplish.
Joan?
so I would like to basically, first of all, we want to make sure that we say declaration instead of state of emergency throughout this, because it is just a term that we're using in prior sections. There was a note that said that should be something between A and B. It says under a state of emergency, the Board of Selectmen, or within the first 30 days of the state of emergency. Maybe we should flip this, say, under a declaration of emergency, the first selectman shall be authorized to. Because once you're out of it, then it automatically goes back to the Board of Selectmen. Or do we?
I don't know, that actually looks, I would tend to think that that's all right. By the way, one of the other things, this hard decisions, like the hard numbers we put in, is the 10% of the overall town budget. We kind of viewed that as we had to put some limit in, and that looks huge. Unless you guys were up to something other different than what we'd expect, that feels like a whole lot of expenditure. But Sam gave me an idea that I'd like to just make sure I understood.
I just want to say, if for some reason a special meeting's called and the board says, yes, we have to continue the state of emergency, that every time after that first 30 days, the Board of Selectmen has to do all of A, B, and C, and I think that's going to clog up the wheels. That was my point. I think if you're either in the state of a declaration of emergency or you're not. And as Sam, and because sometimes it can get very fluid, you want to be able to have this discussion with the chief executive.
I guess I would take B and just make that a separate thing. Okay, and just say that the first selectman, within the first 30 days of a declaration, the first selectman is authorized to enact emergency ordinances under such order should not exceed 30 days without approval of the Board of Selectmen. I would keep that as a separate thing. To me, the budgeted piece, I mean, you could, I would almost, like the shelter thing, I feel is a little too specific, right? I know we talked about that was a thing we did. Did we have the ability to tell the school district we're using your gym for a emergency shelter or whatever, right? But I think we have the ability to do that anyways by state statute, right? Sam, under the emergency management.
By the way, this is while we're answering this, Sam, I was also thinking that that item, that now item B, formerly C, maybe it should just say, and to conduct whatever business necessary to further the whatever the plan's called, the emergency operations plan. You know what I mean? Like that kind of broad statement, basically follow that thing y'all wrote.
The local emergency operations plan.
Yeah. But I don't want to overshadow Peggy's question, which is the thing we were looking to solve in that question, has that already been solved? Can you take over the
Yes.
town gym during a storm?
Yes.
I think, yeah, I
So-
think it's
so-
part.
so
go ahead,
section-
Ben.
Let me go back to the state statute. So section 28-8A, municipal chief executive officer's powers during emergency, benefits for certain persons assisting during emergency and procedure for payment. So the chief executive officer of the municipality, which a major disaster or emergency occurs, or his designee may take such action as deems necessary to mitigate the major disaster or emergency and to secure and preserve any documents and evidence pertinent to and necessary for future investigation. And then the second section goes into about civil preparedness forces, if they're volunteers, they could get paid and stuff like that. But that section there gives the chief executive officer the authority to do whatever is necessary to mitigate that emergency.
Yeah, so it seems to me then that what was the third bullet maybe is just as simple as the first selectman does whatever they can under state statute to respond to the emergency.
What was
Yeah, if
there
you-
before about spending money? I don't recall. Was there any reference to that originally in the,
No,
No.
what you see
No.
in black is all that this section had.
yeah, okay.
It was very light. So we wanted to
Yeah,
give it a
okay.
little bit more direction.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. I just don't even remember. We went through the Board of Finance anyways for pretty much everything, and we involved them, I know, in the early days of what we were doing, with the as part of the EOC. I think we invited them into the EOC at one point.
Yeah, they have a seat in the EOC.
Yeah, so
Um,
I think if the idea is in a pinch, you can spend money, declare orders, and do whatever else you need to under the statute, that I hope solves the question that you had, which was, I don't have the ability to make an executive order. So these are
Yeah.
the three things we've got, which seem to be mirrored under Sam's point under 28-8A anyway.
Yeah. And that makes sense.
Though the only thing, Peggy, I would just stylistically, I would actually continue to make that executive order section a third bullet under the way that we'll write the charter is not make it its own thing. I think those sort of just declare what you can do in a state of emergency, and we can just clean up the header.
Yeah, whatever you want to do. I think it's just good to have it as I guess I was thinking that you don't even need these separate things, but however stylistically you want to do it. But I think that solves the problem. It makes it crystal clear that an emergency order is a temporary ordinance and that there now is a definitive timeline. Because I think there was this concern like, oh, if we extend the emergency declaration of emergency, that means we're agreeing to all these executive orders extending, right? But really, the board now has the ability to pick and choose. They might like two of the executive orders, but they might not want to go forward with one of the other ones. So it gives the board more opportunity to kind of weigh in on that.
And perhaps a little more reassurance that whatever you're, and whatever happens, we haven't rewritten the ordinance of the town of Madison without people paying attention. The selectmen's ordinances expire.
Right.
Good. Anything else that you feel charter worthy from the experience of the last, year and a half?
2 years.
Shh, quiet. Year and a
Well,
half.
we obviously, just living through it, there were so many deadlines that we had in our charter that could have been very problematic to meet because of the inability to hold in-person meetings. And the state kind of stepped in with the executive orders, right? Like, for example, the budgets, we didn't hold a referendum. This was all handled at the state level. But I'm just wondering in terms of, if it was a local emergency, and could we suspend our budget referendum? Can we, I don't know. And it was funny. I was just talking to Nancy, the town clerk, about this. I said, what if we do have a blizzard on February 15th? What are the rules about postponing a referendum? And so that's more of a state issue, I guess. So it seems to be there's not really any guidelines for that. And with COVID, they wrote executive orders because of the in-person, the threat of being in person, or the risks involved with being in person at the very beginning of the pandemic. But I'm just trying to think through, like, is that anywhere, like when you're going through things like holding a referendum, town meeting, what if we can't, like, for example, the town meeting, we have to have the annual town meeting, at least in the existing charter, within 45 days. We have to hold that. What if there's a reason we can't hold it? So there has to be some sort of flexibility of being able to change some of those hard deadlines. And COVID, because the whole state was going through this, that's why all these flurry of executive orders came out to allow flexibility for the towns. But it was just painful going through, because when you have all these really hard deadlines, it just, so that's a question obviously for council about all these rigidness timetables, that there's just not flexibility for disasters in that.
So maybe,
where are those deadlines imposed? Are they imposed in the charter, or are they imposed by state statute?
The
charter.
Charter.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
we
we're
have
trying to
all-
undo those. If they're not by state statute, we're trying to stop the, the date things. It's like, you can have an annual town meeting, period.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you have an annual town meeting, that annual town meeting may actually happen just before the budget, so that it's maybe more people will show up in May than in the middle of February, or,
But when you're doing that, are you thinking through also that voting is going to be changing? We're doing more absentee voting, we're doing more, and then we're holding more meetings remote, but we still can't quite vote for remote meetings, so I'm just trying to keep the document flexible for whatever's going to come out here for voting as well, and for those types of things.
One of the options that we could is, as you think about it, would it work if anytime a state of emergency is declared, we just toll all public meetings? So if you declare a state of emergency around, a storm's coming, around the time of a referendum, the referendum date gets pushed back. I don't know, it's a town clerk question, because I don't know what the notice provision would be like, but just, make it, put it through that if this happens, we will automatically reset the date. And that way you don't have to go back.
Or any town official, official actions. I don't know. This is a council question too, especially obviously for an election that are run by the state, it's different. That's the state, but any locally held thing, the budget referendum is an annual thing required by the charter. And there could be a disaster that would not allow us to hold the budget referendum in the time frame that's in the, and we've come close, last year, we came close. We lost power. There was 2 days beforehand. We had that bad storm, I think before November. And then the primary we almost didn't have because of a storm. But that primary would be state, but local, I'm talking about local stuff. Yeah. Things that we control. And then the town meeting. So I don't know how it gets addressed. I just know that these rigid deadlines are problematic, especially when you're in an emergency, because now you've thrown everything off. Like our whole budget process, you have to have the budget hearing, you have to have this, you have to notice it.
So isn't the question, Peggy, really not what the question's really, you're gonna have to reschedule. So, we get a tornado, the day before a budget referendum or to deal with
Mhm.
Academy, something local.
Mhm.
You're gonna want to recall the vote. So what are you going to do? You, Board of Selectmen, need to reset the date and you need to send out notices. And I think the only thing you want to make sure of is if the calling of it is now outside of any time frame in the charter, that it's clear that something will happen X days, or in the case of an emergency, comma, will be set at a date convenient by the Board of Selectmen, right? That's the mechanic. You're still going to need to reset. You're still going to have to set out notices. Those notices are still going to be controlled by the town clerk. All you want to be sure is if there's a time frame and something bad happens, it's clear by the charter that it's okay to redo it at the later date, right? That's I think what we're talking about. Is there anything else within it? It's not the substance of the vote. It's not the fact that you're having the vote. You don't want to go through the whole rigmarole of redoing it through the Board of Finance and everyone else.
Right,
Just about setting the vote and making sure that it's okay per the charter.
right. Yeah, I
So
think,
is it just the town meeting or is it also referenda? And if it's referenda, then the under current state law, then there's implication on the absentee ballots. Anyone who said that they were out of town for the first date of the vote, what happens there?
mhm.
Well, I think for the question on both of those, I think we need Nancy, right? Because each of them would involve, because the point about voting, are you consider in-person voting is a really good one. Like, what happens if it happens the day before and a bunch of people voted?
Well, that's, I know, it is, I mean, these are.
You just take
things-
that briefcase of votes, lock them up.
I know. Well, I just think about that, these the timelines, to miss a deadline because we're in the middle of an emergency. That's where I just and I'm just looking at like the budget referendum, for example, which is very rigid in our current charter. So that there's so little wiggle room about when, the Board of Finance sends it to the vote, when it goes to the voters. And so it doesn't account for emergencies at all.
We've tried to expand that time frame. And I think we gave a lot more time for the last meeting to then when the actual referendum happens. I believe we tried to go from the back forward and try to make sure that there, and then also we said doesn't need more than one notice versus two notices and that kind of thing. But Liz had a question in the chat that I think I just want to verify that because I was
Yeah, so maybe I was confused, but I thought, Peggy, and we talked about this, that you had to get permission from the Board of Ed in order to use any of the schools. And that actually was true of all the buildings per se that aren't directly owned by the town. So like the library and other places, but, do receive funding either totally or in part through the town budget. So I think that's why we had come to that addition. And again, I think the whole goal of tonight was, are there other documents, state statute or things that, will take care of us not needing to put it into the charter?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
our
that's
theme
right.
has been to decharterize as much as we can.
Well, it sounds like, according to Sam, we can seize any building, right? If we had to, an emergency, private property or
Yes,
otherwise.
once you declare an emergency, if you need something to mitigate that emergency, you can take it.
Yeah, it sounds like we have that authority, so it doesn't have to be in the charter.
Okay, so maybe it just hasn't been used in the past in that kind of,
Yeah, we don't really want to use it like that.
right.
We always nicely
I think I'll
ask.
remind you about the constitutional temporary taking provision, but that's a different matter.
Yeah, that probably wasn't the right way to put it, but what I'm just trying to get at is a mechanism
Mhm.
in place that wouldn't require us to have to put something in the charter. Because I think, again, our whole goal is to try not to keep adding things. but
Mhm.
more clarify and or use existing processes or policies that are already in place that we can refer to. Does that make sense?
Well, it sounds like that we have the authority that we need to get whatever facilities we need according to the state under the declaration of emergency, I guess. So,
So then
Um,
the issue for us then is, to the extent that we have a time frame within the charter, make sure there's a savings paragraph that says something bad happens, this time frame is relieved. And then the second thing is to talk to Nancy to make sure that there's nothing that she would need in the, or need in or out of the charter, so that she can go ahead and just listen to the Board of Selectmen and send out the notices again,
mhm.
whatever the notice provision may be. What I'm hearing is, as far as the emergency powers, as long as we make it clear that Peggy, you can actually issue these orders, that they terminate within 30 days, and that you can declare a state of emergency unilaterally, and we put in the safeguard that if 3 selectmen, think you're taking an intellectual walk, they can come and arrest that function, not arrest, but stop it. That structure seems like it addresses some of the concerns of the current time.
So just so I understand though, that if the state is still in a state of emergency, okay, can the selectmen, and then we declare a local declaration of emergency, and then 3 of the selectmen disagree with the state of emergency, they can take the town out of it, even though the state would still be in it.
Yeah, they're a majority of the board.
Okay.
I'm not sure how,
Well,
how
we've
we-
seen that political discussion happen with COVID, right? So, and I guess we did not authorize our emergency declaration. And I think it was September 2020 is when we ended it because it's,
if I recall correctly, stop me if I'm wrong, Lauren, our provision wasn't that 3 selectmen could take us out, but 3 selectmen could trigger a meeting, right? Wasn't that the issue?
Let me see what, we just put
I
it in.
think
this
It was up at 4 point, it's back in the 4 at 3.
It's 4.1.4K.
Yep.
So
Think
we
she
said
put
a
it-
vote by at least 3 can rescind the declaration of emergency. So you could make that a supermajority vote. You could say a vote of at least 4.
yeah.
If you felt that a simple majority was,
Or we could make it a vote of 3 if we're declared, but 4 if we're declared at the time where the state is in a state of emergency. Those could be set to different levels. Because I'm sort of listening to Sam's and the chief saying, we need, in these times, we need to have a consistent voice with the chief executive. So that would be a mechanic that could address that. Is
Okay.
there any other category or thing that you think the charter needs to say to help, or needs to not say to help?
I can't think of anything.
Excellent. All right, so we should review that mechanic, and then Lauren, is there anything else we would need to know regarding the referenda? And let's literally think of the thunderstorm cell or the sleet storm that comes on the day of the referendum or the budget vote. What do we do then, is I think the question.
the good thing is that you guys have already changed parts of the charter about the notification period. So right now it's a 10-day notification, but the state only requires 5 by statute. And you guys changed your language in this draft to just say following state statute. So if the state keeps it at 5 days, that does help that publication period if we did have to republish the state, the legal notice or something.
Yeah,
Not
I
with
get
our
that.
papers though, because of the time frame, right?
No, this would help because now it's only you only have to post it 5 days in advance. So right now the charter says it's a 10-day in advance publication in the newspaper. when we change this to say we're just gonna follow the state, it's only a 5-day notice.
So you
So
can
we
put it in
actually
later.
we bought ourselves another week.
Right, okay.
But if the state at some point comes out and says, doesn't have to be in the newspaper at all, just needs to be on the website,
Mhm.
we can follow that too under the draft that they're proposing.
Yeah,
Because
we-
they're just saying,
we-
follow the state, and that's it. That's all the detail being given.
We took ourselves out of it.
Yeah,
Good, because the notice period is a problem.
no, exactly.
So,
Though, as we've come to realize, the problem is that the charter is in essence well over 20 years old. So
Mhm.
it's not just the state statute problem. All right. Any other questions or areas we should think about? Commission need anything now that we have the Illuminati of emergency services here with us?
the Illuminati, I like that.
Yeah, you got it.
Yes,
Look at-
Maybe that can
Guys-
replace the selectmen language.
Yeah.
Board of Illuminati,
Well, we should
I
go,
know.
in all
Well,
seriousness,
but maybe
Okay.
not.
I will say that I know you guys are, I don't know where you are in your conversation about that. The more I think about it, I think we need to change the nomenclature.
we are,
Yeah.
as a board, we are
Yes.
open to a better idea
Yeah.
and seeking one.
And
You know,
I think the select board is a possibility, and you're a member of the select board, or the select person. I don't know. I'm starting to
Yeah.
see that referred to a lot, and to me, it's consistent. Person. So those are two good options, I think, to consider. So you think you will be proposing a new nomenclature in the okay, revised.
I think at the very least, we'll give the board the ability to change its name if a common new idea shows up in the coming years. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So if suddenly all boards start to call themselves, executive town boards, then you can just do that, and it's not the charter picking the magic term.
Well, I still think
But
we
that-
have to have something in the charter, Joe. We can't punt on this entirely.
No. But right now, the charter determines the term, the charter gives them a title. So I think it's
Right.
important for the charter to be able to say, this title can be changed by the board itself. And one thing we can't actually, Ira and Pete met with us. We do have a distinct problem in that the statutes say selectmen all over the place. So for our standpoint, we just have to make it clear that for the term selectmen, as understood in state statute, unless modified, shall mean X. And whether that X is another term, which I think we'd be happy to adopt, or that X shall be determined by the board itself. And that way you and your successors can adopt the terms that become common. Because I have a hard time believing 5 years from now, people are gonna be calling themselves selectmen.
Mhm.
You know,
Okay.
it
We can do both.
feels weird.
Come up with a new term and make it clear that the board can change its,
Yeah.
Adopt with the times.
We could include shall be known as selectman, select woman, select person as the board sees fit, or any other term as they adopt, that type of language.
Okay.
'Cause I kind of feel like this is a
We have work to do
problem
on
we'll
this.
have a common answer.
Yeah, it is a little bit, but it's definitely, coming, right? So,
Yeah.
and let's keep ourselves as flexible as possible for that. So.
You don't want to have to launch a charter review in order to change the
Right,
letterhead.
exactly, exactly. So, okay. All
Good.
right, well, hopefully we answered what we could.
Yeah, so not the least of which, thank you for the three of you. The number of hours I'm sure the three of you worked during the last, well, Joan's gone, so I'll admit to 2 years. We appreciate it. We're trying to take the learning you guys have and make sure the charter reflects it, both in what it does and what it doesn't do. So thanks a lot.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right, bye-bye.
See you later. Thank you.
Lauren, I think that was
Thank
the
you
only
for your
business we
time.
had for
We
this
appreciate it.
evening.
That was.
And are you okay with the questions to ask Nancy? Is there anybody
Yep.
else on the Charter Review Commission that if we're going to be bugging the town clerk, we should ask her on the point on the timing? Because I think it's a good point. What happens if something happens that day? And I'm trying to remember what it was, but I'm telling you, and Mark, you may have been along with me. I have a feeling that we drove to Polson like in the ice at one point in time, for some hearing. I don't know what it was, but I can remember pulling in there and taking little shuffle steps all the way from the parking lot in because we had to. Might have just been a budget hearing, but
Yeah, I remember that. Yep. No, that's right. As a matter of fact, I remember there was one time we went to the wrong place.
but then the meeting was more productive. It was just
Not
us.
all of us. But yeah, I remember that time with the ice. Yeah. Yeah, it
Excellent.
doesn't make it easy.
All right, then I get, when's our next meeting, Lauren? Have we set one?
We have not set one.
All right, so do we want to discuss taking this time on the when are we supposed to be talking with Ira next?
We talk with him again next Friday at 10.
All right, so that's the 11th. We should then meet after that time for what I'm sure then will be productive and thorough feedback we'll have. So do we want to try for the 17th, which would be this time 2 Thursdays from now? Does that work for this group?
If it's possible to meet earlier that week, I could attend. I could make a Monday or perhaps a Tuesday. Well, actually Tuesday, I think it's the 14th, but I could make Monday night.
Monday.
If you're interested.
Monday's the 14th.
Oh, it is? Okay, so yeah, Tuesday, I could do Tuesday.
Tuesday is
otherwise-
referendum.
Oh,
Tues-
okay.
And so.
All
staff
right,
is
so
gonna
I
be
won't be able to
crazy.
make it next week, but
I
that
could-
particular week.
I could do Wednesday with the understanding that I am teaching. So if Liz, if you could, reprise just taking over if I run late, I can always do that. And I'm usually not quite as late as I was last time.
I cannot
Wednesday
do
the 6th.
Wednesday.
Sorry.
Oh,
We have a budget workshop and Board of Finance that night.
then I think we might be stuck on the 17th. Aside from
17th
Mark,
works for me.
Dave, how's it do for you?
Yeah, it works for me.
Liz?
Yep.
All right, Mark, I'll have to bring you up to speed on it.
That's fine. I think Joan will be back too.
Okay. All right. So we'll go with the
What
17th.
time on the 17th, Joe?
Does the 5 o'clock work for you guys, or do you want 5:30? What's your preference?
5 o'clock works for me, if it's good with everybody else.
Okay
Yeah.
with me.
I can float this out with some danger. I can, recognizing the hardworking Lauren Rhines, I could do earlier. Can anyone do 4?
I can do 4.
I can do 4.
I think I can. I've got an eye appointment and I should be done. That would be only if I get caught up there, but I should be able to do 4.
We're going to put wicked tiny print on the screen, just so you know. And I want you to come in with those big Jackie O sunglasses that they give you.
Well,
So
listen, I do have to tell you this. Last week or whatever, when I ran it, Matt texted me at the very end. I know he's not on tonight. And he said, can I call you? And I said, sure. So he called me and he said, Liz, I don't want to get too personal, but are you aware that your left eye is totally dilated? And I said to him, and he may have actually said, do you know your eye is blown out? And I said, oh my God, I can't believe you could see that. I mean, it didn't even dawn on me. I had a posterior visceral detachment in my left eye. And I had gone to lunch with my husband at the monkey farm and I was driving home and, like when the sun hits, you don't put your visor and it goes through the trees. And I kept getting this flashing and I didn't think it was anything, right? And then I went in the house and it was dark and it kept happening. And I thought either somebody slipped me a Mickey at the monkey farm or, I'm having a stroke. So, I called my internist and she nailed it. And I went down to Dieselman and he hyper dilated my left eye. And anyway, I said to Matt, well, thank you. I'm glad somebody's looking out for me. So
I think
Wow.
I'm going to remember the phrase, someone slipped me a Mickey at the monkey farm. when I write my next hard-boiled
Yeah.
detective novel, that's going to be my opening line due to Liz Daly,
oh, great. The monkey farm will love me.
So if you think you've got a shot at it, how about like 4:30 then? Do you think that would work a little better for you?
No, I mean, I should be fine. He's just gonna check it out. So I mean, I should be fine at 4.
All right. Well, then why don't we try 4? That way we're not keeping Lawrence for one more night, particularly since it sounds like you're doing that Tuesday and Wednesday. So if that would work a little bit better.
So 4 o'clock on the 17th.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Good,
Thanks,
guys.
everyone. Bye.
Bye,
Good
guys.
luck, guys.
Bye,
Good
guys.
night.